Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about the benefits of starting up a geographical DNA project and explain what we have been able to achieve in our Ballycastle project that has been going now for nearly a year. The first thing is why we would set up a project. Well, in order to understand that, you have to know exactly what a project is. And what a project does is it groups together the DNA results of a number of people who have something in common. Now that can be a location, a geographical location, or it can be a name. Now of the major DNA companies, Family Tree DNA is the only one that has a concept of projects. And when you have a result within a project, you are then able to compare your results with the other people within that project. And that allows you to see how many of them you match and how closely you match them. That is then the key to working out your relationship to those people. When you have a project, you have to have administrators, and the administrators are volunteers who help to run the project, and they will accept new members into the group as well. And the advantage is that administrators are also able to look at the results of project members and help people to find connections. They can even encourage other people to test. So if you're looking at a geographical project, what you're doing is you're looking to apply the detail to a large area that you would normally apply to just a family group when you're doing your family tree. So if you think of that again, if you're looking at your family tree, you're looking at trying to get as much detail as you can on that particular family. In a geographical project, you're trying to become an expert on all the families that live in that area. And that's why the administrators, if they build up that knowledge, they're then able to apply that to all of the project members and find more connections within that group. You're also going to be able to provide a sense of identity because all of those people are going to be connected in some way, even if they are all around the world. Generally, it is best to test people within the community, and therefore there will be a lot of people who are descended from the same ancestors who will be around the world, and that's providing a sense of identity for that group of people. It's something that they all have in common. Now we're going to talk a little about how you would set up a new geographic DNA project. Well, the first thing that you have to do is you have to send an application through to Family Tree DNA setting out your project aims. You can find the application form on their website, and once the application is received by Family Tree DNA, they will have to check to make sure that there's no overlap between the aims of your project and any currently existing project. Once they have made that decision, they will send you a response, normally in about 10 days, which will let you know if your application has been successful. The next decision that you have to make is whether you want to set your project up as a private project or a public project. A private project is really only for people who are working on a small family group of kits and want to be able to work together and to access each other's kits. For a geographic project, you would normally set it up as a public project. And when I say public, that doesn't mean that the details within the project are public. It just means that the existence of the project group is public. And it means that people are going to be aware of the existence of the project and therefore are free to put forward a join request if they want to participate within that project. And then what you have to make sure is that all project members have DNA results on Family Tree DNA, because only Family Tree DNA accounts can be added to Family Tree DNA projects. So what that means is if somebody has got DNA results with another company, such as Ancestry, 23andMe or MyHeritage, it means that they can transfer their results to Family Tree DNA free of charge. That will change nothing in the companies that they transferred from. It will just mean they will have a duplicated account that will be on Family Tree DNA, and they will receive different matches there with people who are on the Family Tree DNA database. So if they transfer over, they will then have an account and they will be able to join your project as well. And then the next thing is administrators are going to have to be found to run the project. sometimes it's only one person and sometimes it's more than one. There's a number of duties that administrators have to participate in, and one of them is to process join requests when people want to join your project. If somebody wants to join your project and they do not fulfill the aims of the project, you do not have to join them. So there, for example, if somebody said they had ancestors from Scotland and they wanted to join a project about Rathlin Island, well, unless they had an ancestor from Rathlin Island, you would probably politely tell them that they are unable to join the project until they know for sure that they have an ancestor from Rathlin Island. Another thing that administrators would do would be to encourage DNA testing and also to help people with queries that they might have, to look at their DNA results, and also to maybe help them put on a family tree, or to be aware of what they could do in order to increase their chances of finding a match. It's probably best to restrict the membership of a project group to those that fulfill the aims of the project, as the example I gave you earlier about somebody who had a Scottish ancestor and was applying to join a Rathlin Island project. You really wouldn't want to do that. And the reason for that is that a lot of people on Family Tree DNA like to join a lot of projects just to see if they have anything in common with the project members. And projects are free to join, so therefore don't be afraid to reject a join request if you need to. All administrators are volunteers, and I am currently a volunteer administrator on the North of Ireland DNA project. Ours is one of the bigger projects, and we have almost 5,300 members at the moment, and that's increasing daily as people are finding out about our existence. We're called the North of Ireland DNA Project because we represent the 9 counties of Ulster, and we're not restricting ourselves to the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. Our project has been set up to promote DNA testing, to try and encourage more people in Northern Ireland to take a test and to work with their DNA results and to increase their knowledge. And a way of increasing their knowledge is by going out and giving talks and providing courses and interest groups and helping people to learn more about their DNA. We also encourage people to use the project in a certain way, and that is by looking at advanced matches. That is a particular tool that you can use in order to compare your DNA results with those within the project group, and you can see very clearly who matches you. You should then be able to see their tree if they have put one up on the Family Tree DNA website, and you can look at their tree and try to find your connection to them. And hopefully you will be able to find what ancestor you are related to them through. So if you were going to set up a new geographical project on Rathlin, then that would be a smaller project than the one I've just mentioned, the North of Ireland project. Although it would be smaller, the results would still be good because the results would be based on the local families, and the local families are going to be the people that are going to connect people within that project. So your aim could be something like finding connections between people around the world whose ancestors once lived on Rathlin Island. And once you have that created, you would then have to appoint administrators who would know something about those local families, and they would then be able to view the people within the project and see their DNA results. They would be able to then help people to find connections, and they would have an overview of the families that live there, and they would be applying that knowledge in order to try to work out the connections between people. They could also assist members with whatever they needed. It could be a general query. It could be maybe adding trees or ancestral surnames to their accounts, because if you do that, that is going to help you to find connections with other people. Then project members are also able to look at your DNA and analyse the specific segments that people are sharing within the project. And those particular segments of DNA are the ones that are coming from your shared ancestors. Our Family Tree DNA has got a family matching tool which they have added, which is extremely useful for working out whether your matches are paternal or maternal. And this works once you're able to confirm a relationship to somebody on your matches list. So once you know how you're related to somebody, you can then link them to your DNA, and anyone else that shares that DNA with you and the other person will either be determined as paternal or maternal. And this can help you to work out your relationships to people who you currently don't know how you're related to. It is also a double check because, for example, in a small community like Rathlin, you could perhaps be related to somebody twice. I know I have people on my DNA that I am related to twice, and what happens is if you are looking at a particular shared block of DNA, you want to determine that it came from the ancestor that you think it came from, because you want to be able to prove your connection and know which connection you are proving. Is it a paternal one or a maternal one? And that's why that's particularly useful. Another thing that Family Tree DNA have currently introduced is they have been adding ancient DNA samples to their database. Autosomal DNA is the type of DNA that you would do if you took a test with MyHeritage or Ancestry or 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA also offer that test too. They call it Family Finder. Once you have done that test, you can then look at the ancient DNA samples and you can see if you match them. They have been uploaded as kits, and these kits could be uploaded to any potential project that you were creating. At the moment, they have uploaded ancient DNA samples for Ballycastle and for an ancient sample that was found on Rathlin Island. You'll see in the photograph there's a photograph of McCaig's bar, and one of the Rathlin bodies that was found behind that bar is one of the ones that have been uploaded now in the last few months to the database. Within the North of Ireland project, we have been able to find that some people already have a small match to those ancient DNA samples. Now that's not going to help you grow your family tree, but it's interesting to see that an ancient body can still have a match to somebody who is alive today. I'm going to talk a little bit now about our Ballycastle DNA project and what we were hoping to achieve when we set this up. We have created this Ballycastle project within the last year, and we were aiming to try to push the boundaries of genealogical information and try to recreate the generations that are just before the paper records. As you know, we all have a block around 1800 in Ireland whenever we're doing our research because of the lack of records from the 1700s. And we can make suppositions before that, but we can't always get the genealogical data that we are looking for. And what we were trying to do was to look at people that were living in the same area for a number of generations and trying to find the connections between them in order to grow family trees backwards. You can see here on the map the town of Ballycastle is located in the parish of Templecorran. Now, we found that the people of Templecorran have strong connections to the neighbouring townlands of Glens and Raleigh and Kilroot and even Island McGee. And this is very good because it means that in order to join our project, one of the criteria was that you had to have an ancestor from Templecorran. But we found when people did have an ancestor from there, they tended to have other ancestors that were from the neighbouring parishes. And therefore, by increasing our knowledge about Templecorran and the neighbouring parishes, it meant that we were able to then analyse the DNA and find connections between people. This is a breakdown of Templecorran. You can see the 11 townlands on the map in front of you. That is a total of 4,544 acres. And in 1831, there was 1,338 people living in Templecorran, of which 316 were living in the village of Ballycastle. We were looking at the ancestors of people that lived in that area in the 1700s and the 1800s. So basically we're talking about a group of about 1,300 or 1,500 people that lived in the area in those days, and it's their descendants that we're looking to find connections between people on. So then we had to decide who we were going to test. Now, we were very lucky in this project that we were able to get some sponsorship. We were able to get a number of donations to our project, and we were able to use that to buy kits. So therefore we were able to fund some of our own kits, and we also got some sponsored kits from Family Tree DNA, which we were very grateful for. So we decided that we wanted to test people who were descendants of those families that I've mentioned who lived in Ballycarry in the 1700s and 1800s. We did a lot of research on those families in order to build up our knowledge of who they were, and then we held local meetings in different locations in Ballycarry, Larne and Island Magee, and we were seeking volunteers from those specific families that we had identified as being in that area. And then we wanted to try to get those people to test to try to see if we could find connections between them. On a number of these occasions, we were testing people who wouldn't otherwise do a DNA test. So that was important to get the information from the local area. We were able to purchase 50 kits or fund them through donations, and we've already found 38 people to take one of those kits, of which we have 36 results back. We're still waiting on 2 results. Once we started the project, we then had to put all the information together and build up our knowledge of the families that lived in the area. We did that by using all the sources available to us. That included births, deaths and marriages. We also looked at the existing census records for Ireland. We looked at the Griffiths valuation, tithe allotment lists and church records. In the Ballycarry area, the church records went back to 1832, which was very useful, but it still meant that there was a large time period before that for which we didn't have church records or civil registration records either. We also looked at gravestone inscriptions and wills, and sometimes they helped to plug the gaps that these other records were not covering. We also looked at other sources such as land records and rent rolls, even family Bibles and newspapers. And through amalgamating the information from all of these sources, we were able to construct family trees for the major families in this area. So once we had our results back from our volunteer testers, it was time to look at the Family Tree DNA database to see who matched each other. We were very lucky in that we found that the majority of our kits had over 7,000 matches, and we were looking then at the matches that project members shared with each other. If people have a match with each other, it means that they share a specific segment of DNA that has been passed down to both of them from a common ancestor. And those common ancestors are the people that we're looking for. They're the ones that are going to be part of the family trees that we have been reconstructing, and they are going to be the people that came from that district. So as I mentioned earlier, we had found 38 volunteer testers, and we're waiting back for 2 results at the moment. So we have 36 results back, and we are managing those particular tests ourselves because the majority of those volunteers are people who have chosen to help us in the Family Tree DNA Ballycarry project, but they are not interested in working on their own DNA. We were then able to find another 62 people who have got results on Family Tree DNA who are managing their own kits, and those people also have Ballycarry ancestors. And then through our project publicity and from trying to get more people involved, we have managed to get 28 other people to give us new test results. Now those new test results were a mixture of people who took a test to get results in order to join our project, and also people who uploaded their DNA from other sites as well. So that meant that in total we are basing our project on a core of 128 people who all have proven ancestry from Ballycarry. And what we are doing is analysing the results that those people share and trying to find the connections between people. Our project has now been going for less than a year, and part of that has been through a pandemic. So therefore we haven't got to move as fast as what we had originally envisaged we would, but I think our results are still quite impressive. So far we have found 239 confirmed matches amongst project members, and most of them are in the 3rd to 4th cousin level. That is to me, quite impressive, and it has helped us to confirm a lot of different connections amongst the different family groups that lived in Ballycastle in the 17 and 1800s. Some of those results are as far back as fifth cousins, and that means that those people shared 4 times great grandparents. If somebody has a match with somebody else within the project, it means they're matching on a specific segment of DNA that came from their common ancestors. So it means that one of these ancestors that lived in the 17 or 1800s had a piece of DNA that they have passed on to 2 of their children, who then passed it on down the lines to these 2 people who match today. So now I'm going to take you through a number of examples that are going to show you how we have made progress. And some of these examples are going back to show where the common ancestors were as far back as the 1740s. As I mentioned earlier, the records sources that we're using only go back to the early 1800s in many cases, and therefore it's important to try to get information before that if we can. Now, wills are a very good source of information, but the wills don't exist prior to 1858 except in patchy circumstances. All the wills before 1858 were destroyed in the fire in the Public Records Office in Dublin 100 years ago. And luckily we have found that a few of the wills before that do still exist, and that's the first example I'm going to give you now. I'm going to talk about a couple called William Dick, who was born in 1807, and his wife Jenny Barron. And both of those people had fathers who left wills, and that's the 2 people that I'm going to examine now. It's just what we could learn from those wills that are genealogical gold, really, and helping us to use that information and compare it to our DNA results. The first of these 2 men was the father of William Dick, who was Edmonston Dick, who was born in 1763 and died in 1847. His will, luckily, still resides in the Public Records Office in Northern Ireland, and we were able to consult that and get some information from it. We find in the will that he mentions 3 of his sons and 3 sons-in-law. His sons were William, Campbell and Robert, and we were able to find who they married and find their descendants. We were also able to identify 2 of his daughters from the names of the sons-in-law that were given in the will. We were able to find out that he had a daughter, Mary, because we knew that a Mary had married a Hugh Snoddy, and we had a family tree constructed for Hugh Snoddy who lived in the area, and we knew that he also had a son-in-law, Robert Kane, and we know that Robert Kane's wife was Jane, so therefore she must have been Jane Dick, the daughter of Edmonston. So what DNA is doing, it is connecting people to other people through a common ancestor. In this particular example, the common ancestor is going to be Edmonston Dick. And what this allowed us to do was to reconstruct this family. And as I've mentioned to you, Hugh Snoddy's wife was Mary, and we found that one of her descendants matched a descendant of Edmonston Dick's son, William. So therefore, this meant that 2 people were connecting, and their DNA was coming from this distance, from Edmonston Dick, who was born in 1763. We also identified 20 grandchildren for Edmonston Dick, and we're now building that family tree down through as many lines as possible to the present day, and that's enabling us to find more DNA connections. So as I mentioned, 2 of our testers were descendants, and this has provided DNA evidence that is allowing us to find that those family trees are correct, and it's taken us right back to this man who was born in 1763. Now, his DNA came from one of his parents, and one of his parents would have lived around probably the 1740s. Now, as I mentioned, Edmonston Dick, he had a son, William, and William's wife was Jenny Barron, and Jenny Barron's father also left a will, and that's the one we're going to look at now. The father of Jenny Barron was Robert Dolan Barron, who was born around 1774. If you look at the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland website, you will find they have a name search, and on their name search is listed everyone who had a will before 1858. Those wills no longer exist, or very few of them do, and this one was actually marked as not in existence anymore. Luckily, we were able to find that it was still held by the family, and therefore we were able to get a copy of this will within our project. The will was full of genealogical information. It mentioned 7 children of Robert Galway Baron, it mentioned that his wife was Agnes Blair, and it mentioned her brother Daniel. We were able to trace the family of Daniel, and we were also able to find all the 7 children of Robert Galway Baron and build up their family tree. We found a gravestone in Temple Corran graveyard, and that was the grave of Robert Galway and his wife, and that gave us an age at time of death, which was able to then be used to calculate the date of birth. We then found through DNA that we had a lot of matches to Robert Galway Baron's descendant. We had one descendant of Robert Galway Baron in our database, and these matches were coming from John Baron, who we were able to prove was a brother of Robert Galway Baron. John Baron had married Margaret Graham, and we found that we had 9 of their descendants DNA tested. And that was very useful because then we were able to compare those DNA matches against the descendant of Robert Galway Baron, and that's where we found the match. So when you look at their dates of birth, John Baron was born in 1766 and Robert Galway was born in 1774. And that means that their parents were probably around in the 1740s. And that means then that the DNA that came down to Robert Galway Baron and to John Baron came from one of their parents who were born around the 1740s. Moving on to our next example, the Hannah family was one where we were able to make real progress. In this little chart in front of you, you can see that we had 2 DNA testers who were the great grandchildren of Edward Hunter and Eliza Hannah, who you will see in the middle of the little family tree. Now, what we could tell from genealogy was that Eliza's father was Hugh Hannah, and we were able to work out that Hugh had married Eliza Beggs. When we looked at gravestone inscriptions, we were lucky to find that Hugh Hannah had a gravestone inscription which currently survived, and luckily enough we found that he was buried with his parents, so that gave us another generation back, and it allowed us to know that Hugh's parents were John and Margaret. Now, we didn't have a surname for Margaret, and that's what we thought we would try to find out through DNA and through the use of the information that was available to us. So the first thing that we did was we looked at baptisms in the local church. Now, Hugh had been born in 1815, and the baptisms in the local church didn't start until 1832, but we thought that perhaps there might be some other children that were born later on. That's only if Hugh was one of the younger members of the family, one of the oldest in the family, and we didn't know if that was the case. So what we did was we looked at the baptisms, and we found that there was a number of children born to a John Hannah and Margaret Wright in the 1830s. Now, what we didn't know yet was, were these the siblings of Hugh, or were they perhaps another family member that we hadn't yet identified? So we looked at the matches, the DNA matches of Tester 1 and Tester 2, who we knew were direct descendants of Hugh Hannah, and we wanted to see if they had any matches to anyone else that matched them on the surname Wright. And the reason we were looking for that was that if Hugh Hannah's mother was Margaret Wright, then it stands to sense that testers 1 and 2 may have inherited some of the DNA from Margaret Wright. So if we could find other people with the Wright surname who were related to Margaret, then we would know that this is the same family connection. And when we looked at the database, we found descendants of a Robert Hill and a Jane Wright matched both testers 1 and 2. Now, the lucky thing was that this match was located in New Zealand, and they didn't have very many Northern Ireland lines, and that meant that the likelihood of this match being through the right family was very high. So what we did was we looked at the wider family and we asked the match in New Zealand if they had any other family members tested, and we found they had another person tested on the database who hadn't put any identifying information on, and therefore we didn't know that they were also a descendant of the right family. And when we looked at their DNA, we found they also matched tester 1 and 2. After subsequent conversations, we were then able to persuade 2 more people that were descended from Robert Hill and Jane Wright to upload to the database, and we also found matches with them as well. Now this was very useful because what we had found now was that we had descendants of Robert Hill and Jane Wright matching descendants of John Wright and Margaret Wright. When we looked at the local church, we also found that Robert Hill and Jane Wright were having children baptised at the same time as John Hannah and Margaret Wright. So that was very useful information. The next thing we found was we looked at the wider family and we tried to find other matches for the descendants of Robert Hill and Jane Wright. And what we found was that there was a descendant of another couple that you'd see on your screen who matched Robert Hill and Jane Wright. If you look up at the top left, you'll see a couple called William Hunter and Eliza Hannah, and they are the 2 times great grandparents of tester 1 and tester 2. Now what we didn't know was that there was a connection between other descendants of William Hunter and Eliza Hannah to the Wright family. Now the only way this could have happened was that if Eliza Hannah was also a descendant of Margaret Wright. And what that means is that Eliza Hannah and Hugh Hannah were actually brother and sister. That means that the couple in the middle, Edward Hunter and Eliza Hannah, were actually cousins who married each other. And this was new genealogical information that we were able to determine from a consideration of the DNA that was given to us. So I'll just give you a little summary of all the information that we were able to find there. And what we were able to do is we were able to prove that Eliza Hannah and Hugh Hannah were siblings and that their children married. Now that information was not preserved in a genealogical form in terms of any documents, but we were able to work this out from a comparison of DNA. We were also able to identify the name Wright by looking at burial information and looking at baptism information. After that, we found DNA evidence to prove that John Hannah and Margaret Wright were their parents, and they were the parents of Eliza and Hugh. We were then able to find a sister for Margaret Wright, so that was taking us back to DNA that came from the generation before that. And the DNA provided 6 descendants of Jane who match 5 descendants of Margaret. So that was a pretty good sample coming from the 2 sisters, and there was a lot of matches between that group of people. It was also quite good because we were getting matches through multiple children. All the matches weren't coming in the same direction, and that meant that we could date the DNA match back as far as the Wrights. So it meant that we were getting matches through 3 children of Margaret and also through 3 children of Jane. And that the most recent common ancestor had to have been the parent of Jane and Margaret, and they would have been born around the 1770s. That was very useful information, and it helped us to grow that particular family branch a bit further. Now what we've subsequently been able to do is we've been able to find other descendants of Robert Hill and Jane Wright who didn't emigrate to New Zealand and who stayed in Northern Ireland, and we've found that their DNA also matches the same segment, and therefore we can then extend the family even further, even though this is before the existence of baptisms and birth certificates. So just to go over some of the things that we have been learning today. One of the most important things is that if you test a higher percentage of people who live in a specific geographical area, you're going to get information that is unique, that you can't find any other way. DNA is the key to confirming relationships and linking families together, even beyond paper records. DNA allows us to delve into our past much more effectively than we've ever been able to do before. And it's the combination of genealogy and DNA that helps us to reconstruct a family tree where paper records no longer exist. Well, thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope this has been of use to you, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. If you do have questions either on setting up a geographic project or on the Ballycastle project specifically, you can send us an email to education@nfhs.org, and I'll be very glad to hear from you. Thanks very much.